G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Welcome to this live session all about hatching. How do you find hatching? I'd love to have your comments in the chat. That would be great. Hatching, cross hatching, it's an area that seems to endlessly cause trouble for people. Gosh, it's all a bit white, isn't it? With the white wall, my white hair, a white shirt. Gosh, anyway, we won't worry about that now. So, cross hatching. Is it your nemesis or is it your friend? What's your cross hatching journey been like? In lots of ways, I feel that the reason so many of us start or at some stage have serious problems with cross hatching, particularly if we're self-taught, if we're navigating our own input, is much the same reason that a lot of us have problems with perspective at the start. And that is that that the sort of videos that we might access first, type in beginner perspective, beginner cross hatching, they usually end up being very, what I'd call, way oversimplified presentations of the subject. And that's okay because we want something simple at the start. The problem with the ones I've seen is that they don't tell you what they don't tell you. And so they can give the impression, in fact, they usually do, that this is how you do it and this is everything you need to know. So go and use perspective, go and use cross hatching. This 10-minute video presentation has fully equipped you. And then you go to use it and you can't work out how to use it. You've got your drawing. Let's just stick to cross hatching at this point. You've maybe done a bit of a line outline and you want to put some shadowed areas into it or some shaded areas into it. And well, you just don't know where to put the lines, how to put the lines, how to angle the lines, how to angle the lines over the other lines, what to do in different sections that meet up, and so forth. And besides that, it's a very simplified, not just technique for using, but also overly simplified presentation of what cross hatching is for. So many people think it's really about how to add shade and shadow over the top of a drawing that we've done. And it's way more than that. And if you're one of the 6 people watching right now, I'd love you to tell me in the chat who you are and where you are. I find that really interesting. And it's a nice way of getting a sense of who we are and what's happening tonight. I say tonight for me, chances are it's the morning, early morning, mid morning, where you are. For me, it's 3 minutes past 8 on a Sunday night. So, how do you feel about cross hatching? Is it your friend or your foe? As I said, I feel like a lot of the frustrations come from inadequate video presentations. And what so many of them seem to do is to leave you practicing, but practicing not in the context of a scene, but just like practicing the technique, you know, gridding up lots of boxes and practicing just doing lots of straight lines, um, lots of straight lines at different angles, parallel, close together, and then angling some over the top to do the cross hatching. And it's almost as if that's what cross hatching's all about, that the technique is just about doing lots of short straight lines, very parallel to each other, very geometric, very parallel. And again, when we're faced with an object to place these on, how do we do this? Where do we do this? Because practicing straight lines doesn't teach us how to use cross hatching in a scene. It's a very minimal technique of drawing that we're practicing, short parallel straight lines. It's not that hard. I mean, maybe we can end up with a page full of little squares with different cross hatching patterns and kind of feel satisfied that we've learned something. But I'm not sure we've learned something that's particularly useful in drawing because cross hatching really is learnt in how it works, or not works, but how it can be used in a drawing. And how we should use it very much depends on what we're trying to achieve. You see, it's not black and white. It's not if you've got this, you do this. When we draw, how we use any technique, how we use any learning, any input we've had, always comes down to what am I trying to achieve in my finished drawing? If we know that, it really directs us very clearly how to use whatever technique we're thinking about. And I'd love to just make sure that the chat actually works. So there you go. I've started it. Could someone just let me know that it's working? Because sometimes there are issues. Yes, it is. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. Appreciate that. And while you're saying hello, any questions about cross hatching? Is what I'm saying ringing true for anyone listening? And I think for me, hello, Annette. Are you looking after our Queen, Queen Mary, the Australian Queen in Denmark? Australia still feels pretty good about that. Because for me, when I started drawing, and I haven't actually been drawing for that long, but I painted for a long time before I started drawing. For me, I was a bit sort of hesitant about cross hatching. Even when I first began to make my cross hatching videos, I felt a little like not as confident using cross hatching as I did with other elements of my drawing. And it was ironically when I began to draw more complex subjects and I wasn't thinking about cross hatching, I wasn't thinking about what angles am I meant to be, doing these lines. I was simply thinking about the result I wanted and then trying to work out how I might create that result, that I found that I began to hatch in ways that were far more varied, far more dynamic, far more flexible than anything I did in my how to do cross hatching videos, which were mostly colonnades of buildings that cast shadows and had a lot of shade in them as well. And so there were lots of, it was sort of architectural cross hatching, which is obviously important if you like drawing architecture. But it was particularly when I was wanting to draw more natural scenes, the Australian bush. I love the Australian bush. We have a lot of it around where I live. We live on the outskirts of Sydney. Sydney is surrounded by national parks to the north, the south, and the west. So it's a wonderful spot for nature lovers, but it's a very dense bushland. It's not like a Swiss or a French forest. The ground is a tangle. If there's no path, you're up to your waist in prickly things and trying to avoid snakes on a hot day. Challenging to draw, especially drawing with a pen, and only having a fine line to create whatever effect we wanted. And it was actually when I began to try and work out how do I create the Australian bush in a way that feels realistic, that captures this tangled, dense undergrowth, multi-layered feel, but isn't a mass of so many lines that it just ends up looking a tangled scribble. And so I wasn't actually thinking, how do I crosshatch? My focus was, how do I capture this scene? How do I capture the effect, the feel of this scene in my drawing? And that I found meant I just began to use lines in a way that I realized was crosshatching, not in a way anyone had ever showed or said. And I suddenly began to see that I could create the effect in so many ways of the Australian bush. What I came to recognize was cross hatching, or hatching as well. But in the dense bushland scenes, more cross hatching. So this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about, in that hopefully you can get a sense that there's lots of growth on the ground, and that there's also lots of layers going back of different vegetation of various heights. and how to manipulate the ink and the lines so that we can separate some things from others so that the brain can focus on a few things and identify them easily, but we also convey the sense that there's a lot more here that we're not actually looking at in detail. That's not being drawn accurately, but we get the feeling that it's there. That was the challenge, and I found that hatching, um, cross hatching closer to the front, and often just hatching further back, was the way that was able to be done. I mean, there are very few lines in this drawing that aren't hatching lines or cross hatching lines. There's some in some of the longer branches and in that thinner tree trunk that we have sort of just a little off center. But basically it's all hatching that creates the scene, as well as some other marks as well. If you're finding this helpful or you're hoping to find it helpful, please hit the like button for me. That would be great. I'd love to have some comments, even just whether you enjoy cross hatching or whether you get really tense because you're not sure of the right way to do it. It would be good to know who I'm talking to tonight, because then I can. And if you have any specific questions about hatching or about particular subjects where you've struggled with hatching, then please feel free to ask them in the chat. I really love to be able to interact with the chat, because otherwise it gets very tiring just trying to think of continuous talking to say to camera. um, my wife should bring me in a cup of coffee soon, so that will help. Yeah, so cross hatching. I just recently posted a video on 10 different ways we can use cross hatching. And so I thought I'd run through those. And in the video, I have a different drawing for each one. And then at the end of the video, I have a drawing that pulls all of these things together in the one drawing. And I'll post a link to that video at the end of this one. But and when I made a list of them before this video, I could only actually think of 9 of them. But anyway, I'll start going through them and just present them, and let me know. Have you used cross hatching for these purposes or not, or is this something you could look to do? But certainly, when I draw these natural bushland scenes, I use a whole lot of them all at once in the one drawing. And it's not that I'm thinking of these categories when I draw. What I'm thinking of is, how do I want my drawing to look at the end? I try and visualize the drawing as much as possible. And the more I've drawn a particular subject, the easier that becomes. So I find it much easier to visualize bushland drawings now because I've drawn a lot of them. If I were to do a portrait, which I don't think I've done a portrait since I've been drawing for YouTube. I don't think I've done a portrait for about 20 years, in fact. I did a pencil one of a self-portrait of myself in pencil about 20 years ago. I think that was the last one. But I would have to work a lot harder to find hatching for that portrait because I'm not so familiar with that subject. But the principles are going to be the same with these 10 ways. It's not subject related. Any subject can be hatched, and it's really just being prepared to start and to critique what we've done, to assess what we've done and how it looks, and push on, move on to the next one when we've got a focus for what's worked well, what hasn't worked that well. So look, the first area is obviously shade and shadow, because that's the hatching area that everyone talks about. That's what videos usually present. There's usually a box or a cone or a sphere that's hatched in a certain way to show the shade. Now, if you're not sure of the difference between shade and shadow, it's really, really helpful to understand it because visually they're not the same. So it's very helpful to know the difference. I do have a video on this, but just in a nutshell, shade is where the light doesn't reach an object. So if I have a sphere, the light's coming down from here, then down here on the other side and the underside of the sphere where it's darker because the light's not reaching it, that's shade. Shadow is cast by an object. So if my sphere is on the ground and the light's coming down and a shadow comes out flat on the ground, then that's shadow. And the reason why it's important to know the difference is because if we take a photo, particularly, or you can see this in life, you don't need a photo. Shadow is darker than shade. The same light, the same object, but the shadow that's cast is darker than the shade. Now, if I'm just drawing with pen and ink, the second one isn't so important. But if I'm using color at all, shadow is cooler and shade is warmer. So if you've got, I think in the video I made on this, I have a street scene and there's two, the buildings on each side of the street are quite close and the sun is quite high, but on one side. So the light's coming down and on one side, all the buildings are in shade, but then there's a shadow being cast across the street and up the other side. And it's really clear that the shadow is darker than the shade and that the 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 shade on the buildings is warmish in undertones, but on the other side of the road, even though the buildings are sort of all the same colors, it's a cool blue undertone as opposed to sort of a warm browny gray undertone. So that is important if we're using color, if we're splashing watercolor on our drawings. Faux Eric Master. I'm not very familiar with cross-hatching. What's the basics behind it? It's simply where we layer lines on each other to create a darkness. Let me find a. So hatching, this is hatching. Hatching is where the lines are all in one direction. So in this drawing, I've particularly used the hatching for, in reality, what is the dark color of the bricks. This is an ornamental gate in an old park in a city, kind of one of the older cities in Sydney, Parramatta, and it's got these lovely decorative corners, but it's a dark red brick, and so we can use hatching to create value, which is simply darkness. When we talk of values, we mean lights and darks. In this case, we're creating a dark value in relation to the rest of the scene. And so I used a series of lines close together, which when we look at them from a little bit of a distance, it creates a darkness. Okay, so one of the uses of the 10 uses that we can use for cross-hatching has got nothing to do with shade or shadow, but it's simply to capture the underlying color. So when we call it local color, we're talking about the way this color looks in average light. So it's not really bright, it's not really dim light, but just a fairly average light, what this color looks like, the unaffected color in a sense. So that's hatching. So it's one layer of lines in one direction. Now they don't have to be straight up and down, they can slope at an angle, but there's only one direction of lines. Cross hatching is where I'm just looking to see what I've got to hand here. Cross hatching is where we layer the hatching over the top. So if we look at this sort of large shrubby bush here, you can see I have lots of vertical lines close together, but they're not all parallel. They're angled. Well, some of them are parallel, but a lot of them are angled over the top of each other, and that creates a much darker effect. So that's cross hatching. And you know, cross hatching can be any number of patterns. It doesn't have to be a regular pattern. In fact, you know, if we're trying to capture realism, we're probably going to be varying our hatching to create different values. Oh, thank you, darling. Got my coffee. To create different values. So variety is always good. It's always helpful. So that's hatching, cross hatching. So I'll be surprised if you draw with pen, if you're not doing it. Even just a series of simple lines, fairly loosely, fairly roughly drawn, is still hatching. They don't have to be sort of carefully. In fact, when I hatch now, my hatching is very, very loose and very fast most of the time. But you always need to be able to control the line. Every mark we put on the paper, even if we're scribbling, has to be with intent and with control. So yeah, choice. We have to be choosing. So if we want a really random scribble effect, that's fine. That's an effect we can use marks on the paper for, but it's by choice. If we're just scribbling because we're losing patience, we want to finish it, or yeah, then that's not so good, because then we're not making the marks with intent. If we're not controlling what we put on the paper, we can't really assess it afterwards and work out, is it effective or not, because it's kind of random and it's not really repeatable either. Should it happen to work out, then it's probably just by luck. Hi there, Stuart from Lincolnshire. Yeah, welcome to a bit of a hot, warm, humid Sydney summer's night, which probably for a lot of you in the cold parts of the world right now probably sounds pretty good. Whereas to me, a bit of an icy nip to the air sounds really attractive. But what I find now is that increasingly, particularly for my non-architecture scenes, I find that I'm creating my scenes through hatching, and I'm using less and less outline for natural scenes, because what I'm discovering is that not looking forward to 40 degrees tomorrow. Harris said, no, yes, I think it's 40 degrees here. Are you in Sydney? I didn't think you were, but yeah, it's going to. I think someone in the family said it's going to be 40 degrees tomorrow. But see, if you look at this, like how many lines are there that aren't hatching? If you look at the path, those horizontal lines across the pathway, they're hatching lines. If you look at the path, I haven't drawn lines for the path. You see, I've hatched in certain directions, and I've joined my hatching lines in certain places, certain controlled places, to create the effect of an edge, which in my mind fairly accurately captured the edge of the forest path. This is a Swiss forest, the edge of the forest path that was in my reference. And that's what I mean, when I talk about cross-hatching becoming my drawing friend instead of my enemy, this is why. Because I found that I can create all sorts of far more realistic effects by controlling my hatching in certain ways and my cross-hatching that I can't create if I'm just rushing to draw outlines to define areas. So this pathway, I mean, this drawing is obviously from a video demo. So there is a video of this being drawn with a voiceover somewhere. I'm sure it's on my cross hatching playlist, so you'll find it there. But I imagine that I kind of defined this path with a series of dots because I knew that those marks, the dots, would be hidden in the cross hatching, and so they wouldn't be obvious. So it would almost look like I did it without any guidance, but I did it with minimal guidance to create the effect. Now, this isn't the first pathway such as this I've created, and so once you've played around with it in a few drawings, this actually probably was one of the first ones. This is not a pathway. This is a dirt road in the Australian bush. But again, if you look at the edges of the path, what I haven't done is I haven't drawn straight lines to define the path, because if you look at the reference, it's not a sharp, hard edge. And edges are so incredibly important when we draw. And when I draw a line for an edge, I create a certain effect. And the question is it realistic? And is anyone watching this, and I'd love you to tell me if it's true, anyone watching this struggle with feeling their drawings end up looking cartoon-like? Is that a problem for anyone, that they just don't look real enough? They look a bit too much like a cartoon, which is great if we're drawing cartoons, but not if we're trying to create a sense of realism in what we draw, capture a sense of realism. Because I found by using hatching more and creating edges through hatching has given me a huge diversity of effects I can create in my edges. Edges are so important because edges are parts of an object in a drawing that when anyone looks at something, whether it's in life or our drawing, we draw additional meaning from the edges. The edges help to define the shape. Um, and particularly a silhouette edge more than any other way. The silhouette edges, and the more stark the silhouette is, say it's before with the sky behind it, then even more so the amount that we will sort of visually, just grab it, and the brain can very quickly work out because there's less clutter around what it's seen. As long as we've captured the essence of the silhouette in real life, and hatching is, I think, a very good way to do that. The way I draw trees, especially the leaves, very good. Thank you. To me, the leaves are chaos, and yes, trying to work my way out of a cartoon effect. Yeah, well, that's because when you think about a cartoon, I mean, if you feel like your drawings look cartoon-like, and that's troublesome for you, a good thing to do is to have a look at some cartoons and remind yourself, what are the characteristics of cartoons? Because if your drawings are looking like a bit like cartoons, then it's because you're capturing, in the way you put marks on the paper to draw the scenes that you're drawing, you're employing some of the characteristics that cartoonists deliberately employ when they draw cartoons. Now, I realize that with cartoons, and particularly with some of the incredible comics that, the graphics of comics that are being put out for adults today, it's a very different world to the Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck cartoons and Bugs Bunny that I used to look at when I was a kid. But particularly with the childhood cartoons that we've seen, what are the characteristics? Well, a heavy emphasis on outline, a heavy emphasis on oversimplification, and often a dependence on symbols like shorthand. So, for instance, a lot of the ways that trees have been drawn in cartoons are instantly recognizable as trees, but they have no botanical truth. I guess in essence, the lollipop tree that children draw is a symbol. It's not really a tree. I mean, I guess there are trees that people have clipped them very carefully that look like that, but in essence, what it really is a symbol that we all recognize as a tree. And so if you draw the symbol, we know that that's a tree. And if you want to draw a row of trees across the back of a cartoon, it's a quick way to do it, and everyone knows what that says. Think of the sun, circle with the rays coming out. You think of a house, and the windows are a box with squares, and the chimney has the smoke with the kind of marshmallow lines coming out from it, and everyone knows what that symbol represents. And there's a little bit of it in touch with reality about it. I mean, it does reflect some aspect of reality, or else it wouldn't be any good as a symbol. But it's highly oversimplified, and it's very dependent on an oversimplified edge, which is drawn with a continuous line. I find more and more often I hardly have the pen on the paper and I'm taking it off. I'm doing very few long continuous lines. Now, that partly depends on how large the drawings you do are, what the scale is, but I guess because I'm recording things, I don't want the videos to be too long or to have to be sped up too much. So um, therefore, they're relatively small, but particularly with hatching, the lines are often very small. So, I'm lots of tiny lines, and that means that I can do them quite quickly. Um, you know, Another really important use of hatching, cross hatching, I think in this drawing, mostly through hatching. If you look at the two large rocks on each side, their rounded surface, you'll see how I've created the sense of the three-dimensional form by controlling my rows of hatching and where the lines change direction to, if you like, cling to the outside shape of the rock. But it's not quite as simple as that because if you look at here, where is it? Here, that section where there are parts where I haven't drawn things, and that reflects the light being caught in a way. And you'll see that here, um, just that I could have drawn a straight line there, a curving line. I'm not very good at this, doing it the opposite. Yeah, a curving kind of line there, but instead the edge is created by the where all the hatching lines end, and that creates a different feel, a much softer feel. And I use this picture quite a lot actually to show this. If we look at these weathered stones, you can see that I've taken the hatching up to different points. And to my mind, that helps create the effect when you look at it a bit of a distance, that there's a rounded weathered edge. Whereas if I'd drawn a line across that edge, well, that's a sharp edge. That's either a stone that's just been chipped or it's a stone that's just been cut. It doesn't convey the weathered feel of decades and decades, maybe 50, 60, 100 years. I'm not sure how old these steps are. They're in a national park. But just the hundreds of thousands or millions of people who've trudged up and down them, wearing down that corner. And so, I don't imagine, I can't, I mean, look down at this one down here too. Again, if I'd drawn a straight line right the way across, a continuous line, that wouldn't have captured that feel. So, I mean, I've reached the point where, because of probably partly what I draw and how I draw it, there are many things I just couldn't draw without hatching. But for me, the interesting thing is to reflect on the fact that I learned to hatch this way by not thinking about hatching at all, but by thinking, what effect am I trying to capture in my drawing? And then what marks will create that effect? And let me tell you, experimenting with those marks. And then at the end of the drawing, having a look at what I've done and working out whether it works. Now, I often talk about, I'm just grabbing some of them up here so I can show you what I mean. I often talk about how in every drawing I do, I spend a few minutes at the start experimenting, just playing around. Oh, actually, this is good because this is the one for the drawing I showed you earlier. This one. Okay, so the day I was drawing this, before I started, I had my reference photo, which, oh, look, I could probably grab it in a few minutes, but yeah, that's a bit. Drawing this, before I started to draw this, I grabbed a sheet of scrap paper and I began to do my exploratory marks. Now, I achieve a number of things with this. It does provide a bit of warm-up, hand-eye coordination, get my confidence going. It's not a thumbnail. I don't try and do a simplified version of the whole thing. It's not to work out overall composition or values. I've usually done that when I've edited the photo that I'm using as my reference. But it's where I experiment with marks for the effects I'm wanting to create. And depending on the subject, it might just be 30 to 60 seconds, or it might be 2 or 3 minutes. It would be very rare for it to go longer than sort of 3 or 4 minutes. Now, let me show you this. This was my mark making for that one. So I was exploring particularly whether I could create the effect of the shrubs, the bushes, but I was also looking at if you look at here, you see I was just experimenting with another very important use of hatching, and that's to use it with negative space for complex subjects. So this kind of strappy plant that sort of bursts out from a center in all directions has a dark shrub behind it. And so it creates a fairly prominent silhouette. And if you look at my drawing, here it is. you can kind of see how I've, in more detail here, how I've done it. Now, depending how confident I am with this, if there's something with this that I feel is not working out too well, then I'll spend a little bit more time just on that until I'm happy with the marks. Because if I haven't worked out marks here that I'm happy with, there's no point starting the drawing. There's no point kind of, because I'm just guessing if that's the case. So it's not as if I'm experimenting with all the marks I'm going to need, but I experiment with all the marks that um, that I'll need. See, I mean, in this drawing, there's no hatching. I was really just looking at the proportions. This was an old silver teapot. I actually started to draw it and the proportions weren't right. It looks reasonable enough there, but it didn't look like the teapot in the reference. And so then I tried again. But there wasn't any hatching to do. So it's not necessarily hatching. Here's one that's there's another one I did for this look, I think it's actually a water fountain in a park near the Houses of Parliament on the banks of the Thames in London. But that's another one where I was trying to capture the effect of a whole massive of architectural detail, and I wasn't wanting to draw it, but instead capture the effect. And so I was just experimenting with the in my head the way I thought I would use marks to do that. If you look at the background, you can see I have actually used hatching. I've done vertical hatching behind the columns because this is you can see through this structure at ground level. And that's another important use of hatching, is to create clarity in what we're looking at, especially in a scene that's very busy. It lets us create distinction from one area to it, from one subject to another. And we can do that either, as I did in that one, where it's light and dark, or I can do it by changing the direction of the lines, which is what I did in this one. If you look at the tree, this tree is a fairly important part, and you'll notice that all the trees behind it, the hatching it's not completely straight up and down, but it certainly favors a vertical approach. Whereas on the tree, my hatching lines go horizontally for a number of reasons. But one of them is to visually separate this tree, to make it really obvious this is a different thing from the things that are being created by the lines next to it. Hang on. Okay, I'll just look at these comments. RS's asking, have I considered visiting the flower that smells of death to sketch? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I need to go close to a flower that smells of death at my age. I think I'm old enough that I'd rather go to a flower that smells of life rather than one that smells of death. Yes, I did see that in the news. Practice marks, yeah. Yeah, really important. Sir, can I give videos of human figures in proportion with the dynamics? Sangam, look, the truth is it's not an area I think I have particular skill in, because it's not an area I've particularly wanted to draw. And I think, look, particularly kind of if you're wanting to go with your art in the anime direction, or superheroes, or these sorts of things, where there's a lot of extreme perspectives, a lot of looking straight up from low down, or looking down from up high, and a lot of, depending on the cartoon, the comic, exaggerated bulks and all of this, and figures and all of that, then that's a pretty technical area. That's like architecture, but a different area. And yeah, I mean, it's one thing to, like, if you develop drawing skills in a particular area and you work really hard and you develop them to a reasonably high standard, as I think I've done with my architecture and my bushland scenes. I'm sure that gives you like a head start when you go to apply those to a different area, but there's no way you're going to draw the totally new area to the same level without a lot of practice and work, because that's how things happen. Um, and I suppose I just haven't wanted to do that. I've enjoyed what I draw, and what is perspective in your perception? Look, perspective in general terms is simply how something looks from a particular viewing point. And so if you change where you look at a building from, the perspective changes because the angles with which you look at it change. If you stand up higher, the perspective changes. If you go down lower, it changes. If you move to the left or the right, it changes. If you lie on the ground and look up, it's the same thing. It really changes. If you simply go backwards, I don't know, 100 meters, it changes how the thing looks. So and that's the way we use perspective metaphorically. I talk about my perspective on politics. It's my perception, my viewpoint of politics. But this is why I think the most crucial thing when considering perspective is to know where eye level is, because if the perspective changes according to where we're looking at it from, then where we're looking at it from is the most crucial thing about it. It's another reason why I think eye level is such a more helpful term to use with perspective than horizon line, which I think can be misleading, and it doesn't give us, and it can have a different meaning. And in a given scene, the local geography, that may not be a helpful term to use or to look for. Whereas eye level, I think, it tells us what it is. It's the level of our eye when we view it. If it's a photo, it's the level of the camera. If we're drawing from a photo, we have to be conscious. If we didn't take the photo and prepare it, then we need to be aware the photo may have been cropped. And that may shift sort of key elements of what we're considering. But it's still possible to find, although more easily with some subjects than others, the elements we need to find eye level. So yeah. So but that's what perspective is. Perspective is and I mean, at the very start of this video, I don't know that you were on board, Sangam. At the very start of this video, I actually put cross-hatching and perspective together, in that part of the reason we have so many problems, I believe, and especially if we haven't done a course with a teacher that we could ask questions with and all that, is that in both these areas, that if we Google for a video on, basic perspective, basic cross-hatching for beginners, perspective for beginners, then what we usually get is a very simple but overly simple presentation. And with perspective, it's the box on a flat plane with vanishing points, and we look at it and we think, yeah, that makes sense, and then we might copy what's in the demo, but then we go to apply it in real life and it doesn't seem to work. And the problem is the video hasn't told us this is only how it looks if it's a box shape on a flat plane that's completely flat from here to the as far as you can see. And it doesn't work this same way if it's downhill or uphill, or if all the buildings are on a curve, let alone a curve that goes up and down. It doesn't tell us that you need to know more than what we've told you in this video. And that's the problem. But when we go to apply it, because we thought we understood the video, because it didn't tell us what it's not telling us, we assume that, oh, I must be the problem. I obviously can't understand it. And I think most of the perspective videos do a presentation that actually comes more from the needs of architects. And I suspect it comes from a simplified version of training that architects received. and people just copy the videos they've seen and make new videos of videos of videos, and so it never actually changes. Whereas the needs of an artist in employing perspective are very different to the needs of an architect. An architect just, well, not always, but often wants to particularly showcase a building in a dramatic, almost exaggerated perspective because it makes it look dramatic. And so it will be flat and, blah blah blah. And so it works. It's fine for the architects, but it's not the same for an artist. Again, the videos and cross hatching is, looping back to what this is about. Cross hatching is the same. We watch videos that end up giving us lots of little squares that we have to fill in with hatching patterns. And then there's a simplified shape. Maybe it's a cube, or maybe if it's a more advanced video, it's a sphere with light coming on it. And we have to hatch the shade and also the shadow using cross hatching. And, they're either curved lines or straight lines, but it's all very controlled and contained what we have to do. But, yes, then I try and draw something that's not a cube or a sphere, and I'm left thinking, how do I draw this? How do I cross hatch? How do I do the cross hatching for this? And we haven't been equipped to do it. But we don't know we haven't been equipped. And again, we just think, I don't understand. I thought I understood it and now I can't use it. Maybe I shouldn't try and draw. Maybe drawing's not for me. I just don't have the talent or the brains or the whatever. And that's not the problem, but it's the unhelpful, oversimplified way things are presented. Let me have a look, Ariset. Your videos on the street perspective are so good when the street seems to go down, but the building is straight. They're gold. Thank you. Yeah, look, I do have, I think, 3 playlists on perspective. One has all the videos on it, and I think there's about 100 videos on that. Another one it was meant to be a 20 video course on perspective that I think is about 25 videos. But that kind of, I think, has one video, what I thought was the best video of mine on one particular topic of perspective. So there's a video on uphill, a video on downhill, which is really the same. It just depends whether you're standing at the top of the hill or the bottom of the hill. There's one on a curving street, and there's one on a long street that goes up and down and around a corner. Yeah, so I have a whole range of playlists on that. And there's another perspective video which is which looks at the concept. And this is why I say it's I don't think perspective videos are always helpful for artists, for the needs of artists, of drawing artists, or painting. It's the same. One thing I find very helpful, and I have a couple of videos that explain this in more detail, is to think of perspective as the principle that things get smaller as they move further away. And that makes sense if we're looking straight onto everything. But if it's an object that's a bit larger and we're looking at an angle, then part of the object is further away and it's going to look smaller than the part closest to us, even if it's the same height. And so the closest corner of the building is going to look larger, taller than the further away part of the building, even though the wall is the same height. But it's not just the height that shrinks as it moves away, but the width gets smaller as it moves away. But we wouldn't use the word smaller, we'd use the word narrower, and that's foreshortening. But foreshortening and the perspective angles are exactly the same thing. It's just that it's the height and the width. The height and the width that shrink in size as it moves further away. And so perspective is, if you like, the theory that describes that happening, and that sort of captures, if you like, the visual physics, I don't know the right word to use, of how it happens. But there's nothing magical or mystical about it. It's simply a way of describing the physics of how visually something shrinks in size as it moves further away, particularly large objects. And it's no different with a figure. It's not just buildings. If I'm on the ground looking up at a figure, then they're going to kind of be shrinking up like this because the closer parts look bigger, means they look wider and they look higher. And as the figure moves away from me in space, it will narrow and it will shrink this way. Now, it's not just that, I'll actually get a different view. If you look at a person straight on, then you see this. If you're down below looking up, then you'll start to see like under the chin, under the nostrils. There may be parts like the eyes in the eye cavities that we don't see because the cheekbones are hiding. The same thing happens in architecture with, say, what you see of a window, but it's not as obvious in the architecture as it is in a figure. So, and these are the things that if we focus on one subject repeatedly and we do it carefully, and we particularly observe our reference, we get to be able to anticipate how the perspective will work. And that makes it easier for us then to observe because we start to know what we're looking for before we see it. And as I endlessly say in my videos, if we know what we're looking for, we understand the dynamics of what we're seeing, it makes it easier to see it. And the more accurately we see something, the more chance we have to now find the marks to capture it. Now, it doesn't mean we will necessarily successfully capture it, but I have more chance than if I haven't seen it properly because I didn't realize I'd have to look so carefully. I didn't see the things I wasn't expecting to see because maybe some of them are subtle and so forth. So, yeah. So if you haven't said hello on the chat and you're watching now, please do. If you haven't hit the like button, that helps me out. I'd really appreciate that. And I'd love to have any questions you've got about, well, particularly about cross-hatching, but any drawing question at all, I'm happy to have a go at answering, But I particularly love to know where in the world you are. I'm old enough to be amazed at the internet, and amazed. I think back, gosh, when I was a kid, a phone call to somewhere in a neighboring state was like the whole house stopped and the operator had to connect it. And I feel like I'm 110 just talking about it, and it cost a fortune. And now you can talk to the world for nothing. So it's amazing. Arkansas, USA. Aha. Well, welcome, MR. What time is it in Arkansas? Is it Sunday already in Arkansas, or is it still Saturday over there? It's probably Sunday because we're getting pretty close to Monday. Sweden. Oh, that sounds nice and cool. Sweden. Cool in two ways, I guess. Metaphorically, at 3:52 a.m. Why aren't you asleep? Oh, I don't know. I wouldn't get up to listen to me go on at 3:52. I guess you're already awake in Russia. Oh gosh, I know a little bit of Cyrillic, but I won't try and guess that with the pressure. Welcome. A lot of time zones in Russia. Pennsylvania, Ireland, Elijah. Oh, I've got two of my grandparents. My father's parents were both born in Ireland, in County Kildare, just outside of Dublin, and we've been there. That's great. Oh, you're drawing. Well, I'm still not sure why. I wouldn't like to see my drawings if I did them at 3:52. But that's great. What are you drawing? What are you drawing? And what are you drawing it with? Are you a pencil person or ink or mixed media? And from the UK, hi Anne, and 10:50 a.m. in Sweden, Kevin. Well, that sounds respectable. 10:52. That's an okay time to be up. Look, my cup of coffee's gone cold. I can't. I feel like I haven't stopped talking since the moment I started. Have I been raving on for an hour? Gosh. I just catch my breath. So, any questions while I'm catching my breath? This is a great time to ask them. It doesn't have to be about hatching, but what's your drawing experience? Have you been drawing for very long? Is there anything that I haven't addressed in my videos? That yes, this can be watched after the live. Kevin, it is posted straight away. MR is drawing with a lead holder on Strathmore 400 smooth and drawing some people on TV. Just drawing what I see and doing some exercises for no reason. Oh, there's always a reason. Okay, so you're watching TV and the people are moving and you're trying to capture a fairly gestural drawing, sort of capture a sense of the movement, are you? That sounds pretty challenging at 3:52 in the morning. Good on you. Um, it's better than lying in bed getting stressed because you can't get back to sleep, I guess. Yeah, yeah. Fortunately, I can usually get back to sleep if I wake up. That's great. Well, thanks for everyone who shared there. Does anyone have a drawing question or a suggestion of something that perhaps I could do a video on? Mind you, I think I'm getting close to 1,200 videos now on YouTube, so it might be more a case of confirming whether I do or don't have one already. Um, I find it interesting to watch my earlier videos and just to see the change in my drawing as well. Um, and it's not that there's anything wrong, I think, with what I was doing at the start, but if we draw with intent and we draw continually evaluating what we do, then we can keep evolving what we do and how we do it. I think that's important for lots of reasons in our drawing. So if you don't, I mean, I say this a lot, but every time you finish a drawing, it's not just that, I spend a few minutes doing some quick sketching to sort of like in this one, I was just working out the sort of the overall perspective of the chair and of the patterns, you know. Um, Here you go. This is a drawing. Um, these are my marks for a drawing that I didn't do because I couldn't find the marks that would work in the right way. So sometimes doing these couple of minutes actually stops us from getting a bit discouraged with what we do. This is one that I did draw, some trees, but it was a particular tree, a particular type of pine tree, and I was just wanting to make sure whether I was going to capture what was happening. Elijah, do you think it's better for a beginner of architecture to draw from life or from a photo? Um, Look, um, if you want to draw from life, don't let me discourage you. And it's great to sit in the street and do live drawing. It's actually how I started drawing architecture on a trip to Europe in 2018. And I really enjoyed it. And I only drew from photos when I came back to Sydney because I wanted to keep drawing Paris, and Paris isn't very convenient when you live in Australia. But I have done more street sketching since then, but COVID did mess things up a lot. The thing to remember is that when we draw from life, one of the challenges, whatever we draw, is that in life we're looking at something in 3 dimensions. But when I draw, I'm creating something in 2 dimensions. A sheet of paper with ink on it is 2-dimensional. My subject I'm looking at in front of me is 3-dimensional. So I have to translate from 3 dimensions into 2 dimensions. Now, that is a level of challenge. When I draw from a photo, the camera has already captured the 3 dimensions and translated it through a photographic process, not a graphic one, into 2 dimensions. And that's the main reason why a photo drawing from a photo feels easier, because a lot of the translation work has already been done. But if we draw from a photo, we need to realize that photos present challenges that drawing from life doesn't, and particularly that it flattens everything, it brings everything together. And so particularly for trees, if I look at a tree in real life, because I'm looking through 2 eyes and stereoscopic vision, slightly different picture combined together to create a 3-dimensional effect, then that's great. It feels 3-dimensional. But in a photo taken from one lens, it's like shutting one eye, and suddenly everything's very flat and it loses its roundness. But the camera captures so much detail that it all kind of looks like it's at the same level. And so if we like copy the photo, how the photo looks, our tree can end up looking as 2-dimensional as the photo looks. When you've got a tree, next time you got a tree, cover one eye, don't shut the eye, but cover one eye and keep doing this and just see how the effect of going from 3 dimensions to looking 2-dimensionals back and forth, the impact it has on your ability to actually understand the form, the 3-dimensional form of the tree. I talk about shape and form. Shape is 2-dimensional. Get a bit of paper, I cut out a square, that's a shape. I make it into a cube, that's a form, that's 3-dimensional. That's how I'm using the words. Yeah. And so when I draw from a photo, the photo has taken out the sense of 3 dimensions that I need to, well, I don't need to, but I want to put that back in. So I want to use the strengths of the photo, but I want to overcome the weakness of the photo by the way I do my drawing. It's a mistake to think that our aim is to copy the photo. I can't copy the photo. And even if I could, it would never look as good as the photo as far as a capture of the scene. So what I think of is when I draw from a photo, the photo is a springboard that I use for my drawing. So I start with that. I base a lot on that. But anything that comes to mind that can improve my drawing, I never feel bound by the photo. Yeah. Which I found very helpful once I realized that I'm not trying to copy the drawing. I can't even if I wanted to, I couldn't. That's not what I'm doing. I'm using this as my starting point. The other area though, why drawing from life is so much difficult is because now I talked before about how perspective changes when we change our viewing position. And I used fairly extreme examples. So if I'm looking straight at a building, the perspective changes. If I lie on the ground and look up, or if I go up to a 3-story building and look down, the perspective changes dramatically. But if I just move slightly, it changes as well. And when I'm looking at a scene, what this means is when I'm looking at something I'm drawing, if I look up and just tilt my head sideways to get a better look at something, what actually happens is the entire perspective of what I see has changed. And I don't really do this myself, but there are some amazing artists on Instagram who do this sort of wraparound perspective stuff, which is to capture that distortion of when you move your head around the place. But that's relatively advanced, as amazing as it can look. So, but if I'm not aware of this, then what happens is when I look up, I'm not looking up in exactly the same place. I'm not keeping the same focus. I'm looking in each direction to get more detail, not realizing that the scene's changing. And now my drawing starts to look distorted in ways that I didn't intend and can't understand. And this is why, because I haven't appreciated that fact that when I turn slightly, the perspective changes, but I haven't realized it. So, but look, I always say, look, draw what you want to end up being able to draw, and draw the way you want to be able to end up drawing. So if your heart's passion is to be able to sit in the street and draw, do it, because that's how you'll learn to do street drawing, is by being in the street drawing. But if that's not always accessible, we certainly can learn from using photos, but it's good to understand the different dynamics in drawing from a photo to drawing from a life location. Oh, that's good. Elijah, hang on, let me just go back. Emma's mostly trying to figure out which characteristics of the face matter the most to make the drawing recognizable as that particular person. Yeah, like caption. I take it you're doing comic work, and so yes, you've got a character, and you want that character to look like that character, regardless of the angle that you've drawn them from. So that would be very challenging. Yeah, it's not a challenge that I face. James, Oklahoma. Can't help but think of the musical, can you? I do enjoy all your hard work, so you draw just about every day. Yes, yeah. Well, every time I post a video with a drawing, I've drawn it. Some days it just doesn't work, but for me to do a drawing, I don't mean the drawing doesn't work, but Yeah, sometimes there's other things where I'm doing with my life, but I really enjoy the drawing and making the videos. So, and that helps. And sticking with a limited subject area, even though within that there's a lot of diversity, also helps because I'm not trying to solve totally different problems each drawing, and I can get some traction with some of them. So, yeah, yep. Um, And look, you don't have to draw for a long session. I mean, most of my drawings, um, well, look, most of my YouTube drawings take me 20 to 40 minutes and in real time, which isn't a huge amount. And if I wasn't having to then edit and post a video, that would be it. I'd get up. Besides the critiquing afterwards, I'd get up and walk away. So, and I talk about a learning cycle in drawing, and a learning cycle is doing a drawing and critiquing it, because it's the critiquing that's the really vital part, because that sets me up for the next drawing with the focus I need to have to improve. We don't improve accidentally. We don't improve by just doing lots of drawing. I can do lots of drawing and I can have the same weakness in every single drawing, either because I didn't recognize it or I didn't care about it. But if I want to improve, I'm not in a class with a teacher who I'm paying to do this, then I need to learn to critique my drawings, to find the things that aren't working, and to find the solution to that, and to stay in that place for a while until I find a solution that I'm happy with for the level I'm at in my drawing. So, but it's that learning cycle. And if I do 2-hour drawings, then it takes me 2 hours to go through a drawing cycle. And maybe I can only draw for 2 hours once a week or once a fortnight or once a month. But if I'm drawing for 20 minutes, I could do 3 drawings. No, I could do more than that. I could do 5 or 6 drawings and go through 5 learning cycles, therefore learn 5, 6 times as much as that 2-hour session. So, you know, less is more, I think, when we're learning to draw. There's no point spending hours on something that's going to have all these weaknesses in it. I'm better off discovering those weaknesses in drawings that I can do in much less time, and then eventually learning to overcome those weaknesses. I can do the 2-hour drawing if that's what I want. Um, and I'm using them to produce drawings that don't have problems, which is always nice in a big drawing, a time-consuming drawing. Emma, right? Hence the exercise. I'm breaking it down into basic shapes and putting those shapes into overlapping combinations to make the features have depth. Yeah, great, excellent. Glad to help. India, welcome, Sank. I have a lot of followers in India. A lot of people watching my videos in India. A lot of people drawing there, which is great. Not such a terrible time zone, India and Australia. Not such a bad time zone difference. Drawing from life really difficult. Yeah. Oh, well, I'm glad to shed some light on it. Yep. Thanks, Anne. Jaden, hi, Stephen. Love your content. Would you be interested in doing a video where you give feedback to a few viewers' drawings? Look, there isn't that possibility on YouTube. I have thought of making videos on that. I think what scared me is if I asked for drawings, I thought I could get hundreds of emails, whatever, messages on Instagram with people wanting me to critique. I do actually do give lessons privately, and I do one-off critiques as part of that, but I do charge for that. All my videos are free. There's on YouTube. There's no information that I hold back. I don't have a course that you get the real stuff with. Everything I know, I discover in my drawing is in my videos. But I do actually charge for lessons, individual lessons, and I do critique as part of that. But I have thought, yes, that it would actually make a good video to kind of be critiquing someone's. Look, I did once actually. No, I did once. I did once with a guy in New York. It's an early video, and it had a lot of. It was a New York street scene, and there were lots of good things about it. It was done in a blue pen, blue biro, but there were some fundamental issues, and I did contact him and got his permission, and I did that. So I did do that once. So maybe I'll do it that way. Actually, contact someone, DM them through Instagram, and yeah, because it is a good example of how to critique and what critiquing can discover. But as I said, I've just been a bit scared to put a public request out there and just to be overwhelmed with because I spend so much time like with a screen and type in. It's drives my family crazy sometimes. How fast becoming an artist, content creator changed your life? You've seen a lot of change in the world. What would 1970s Stephen think about where you're at? Which you well, 1970s Stephen was in high school. I started high school in 1970 and then university in 1976. So, and my last year of university was 1979. So, and I started my teaching job, which was English, in 1980. So, gosh, the 70s was my high school and my university time. I did art in high school. Always struggled with it. Had a lot of hang-ups about my art. Very insecure. I felt that everyone else was better. Hated anyone to see what I did. I was probably perfectionistic and didn't recognize it. I just, yeah. And so it was a real love-hate thing. I must have done some things that were impressive when I was real little because I sort of felt like I had that people said, "Oh, you're very artistic," and that was just a nightmare. It was just put all this pressure on me, and I felt that I was only ever going to disappoint people. Gosh, I sound a messed up kid, don't I? And when I even at school, I only really did the art that I had to do, and so I think 1970s Stephen would be absolutely thrilled that that 2020s Stephen got over it, worked through it, and is able to enjoy it now. And it really is an important part of my life. The other thing, I actually only taught for 3 years because I had a lot of problems. I discovered I had voice issues and my vocal cords aren't properly formed. There's actually a photo of them in an Australian ear, nose and throat textbook because what I've got isn't very common. But it meant I couldn't go back to teaching. I left it to do some youth work for a while, thinking I'd go back, and then I couldn't go back. And so, yeah, I had to leave all. I trained to teach for 4 years and only could teach for 3. And so YouTube's great because I feel like it's connected with the teacher in me as well as the artist in me in a really nice way. So I think 1970s Stephen would be really pleased. But like I had 30 years where I did nothing. I was 50 when I started doing art, really, and that was painting. So oil painting, corner of a painting you can see there, big painting of a tree, and it's interesting. Like I have videos where I talk about if you go deep in one area, you learn the skills of going deep. And you learn skills that surprisingly overlap in a totally different area. And I certainly found that when I first began to draw in pencil trees, when I was doing Paris streetscapes and stuff, lots of trees in streets and next to big buildings. And I found that I suddenly realized I was consciously using the skills I developed to create trees with oil paint in drawing with a pencil. And then when I switched to a pen and was doing ink, yeah, a lot of that stuff just flowed across. But if I hadn't painted them for 10 years, I'd have been starting at a much more confusing place, I think, in trying to draw a tree with a pen, with a very thin line. So, I mean, I mean, I haven't done, I'm not trained in art. My videos are all my self-discovery of what's worked for me, and it won't suit everyone, but I hope it suits a lot of people. And if not, it may trigger thinking that leads you to your solution for what you're trying to do in your art. I hope whatever my videos do, whether the actual content is always um, something you can take straight as is or not, that at least you're encouraged to give it a go, because it does take some courage, I think, to commit things to paper, because when you're finished, it's there, and and you can't avoid being confronted with, was it successful or not? Have I impressed myself or disappointed myself? And it's there for other people to look at too. And I think that's why in art at school I didn't want to do anything, because I didn't want people to see that I wasn't as good as they thought I was going to be. Is this ringing a bell for anyone? I don't know why artists are often so hung up about things, but it just seems to be, can be part of the game. Um, Wonderful chat. You have identified to me the difference between silhouettes and solid line and hatching. Yeah, that's great. That's great, Stuart. Yeah. And it does depend how we want to draw. But if we, and you don't have to be trying to capture in, oh gosh, there's so many, they're disappearing. You don't have to want to draw with realism. There are other stylistic approaches. But yeah, I mean, my work is obviously most relevant if you want to draw in a similar kind of way, in a similar mindset to me. But we can still spark ideas off things that are in a different sort of groove, but it's all graphic representation with ink or pencil. Or do I have a basic layout for what is going to be darkest and lightest? What's a good way to approach depth and value? Unless I caught you later. No, I haven't talked about that, Emma. And look, one of the 10 reasons, and look, just a little add, one of the more recent videos I've done, like, it was like 4 days ago or something, was 10 ways to use cross hatching in drawing. So it's not just shade and shadow, but there are 10 ways I worked out that I employ cross hatching in my drawings for different purposes, different effects. And one of them is value, is just to create, and well, depth is another one too. Depth might be the one I missed out, the ninth one. So I have a video where I have a drawing for each of the 10 and highlight it, and then I have a drawing at the end where I show all 10 in the 11th drawing. Yeah, if you haven't seen that video, I will put a link at the end of this, but that probably won't be on there till in the morning. What was I saying? Yeah. So cross hatching, we create depth, we create different layers of darkness, and we can vary those. I mean, if you look at this, there are parts where it's quite dark, almost black, and then there are parts where the effect is quite grey, and then there are parts where there's a lot of paper showing through, so it's very light. And so we crosshatch to manipulate the values. But where's that drawing? There's a particular drawing I want. I'm not sure if it'll show up on camera. Where is it? I thought they were all. Sorry, I know. I put the box of my preliminary drawings on top of the drawings. Let's hope I didn't crease them. So there's the one I'm looking for. Sorry, am I off camera? Yes, I'm off camera. I've just got a big pile of drawings here. So I'm just flicking through them to find the one that I want. Here it is. So I'm not sure how this is going to show up, but this is a recent drawing too. If you look in the background, this is actually a small wattle tree, and there's a little creek behind it. And the far side of the creek is a massive trees that go very high, go like 30 meters high. And there's a lot of dark shade. But I wanted to capture the effect that in that darkness, some parts were like um, clumps of leaves coming forward a little bit, which caught the light, just could probably catching bouncing reflected light just ever so slightly. But you could sense them. It wasn't like a solid black wall of darkness. And so, can you see how I've hatched in a way to create a sort of a movement of lighter and darker areas to capture that, the subtlety of that. So in terms of value, this is you know where cross hatching is great. I don't know how you draw that otherwise. You'll see how I've also actually drawn the tree, the outline, not by drawing an outline around it. I couldn't have captured the feathery kind of effect of the new growth of this small wattle tree. I drew the tree by drawing the darkness behind it and through it with cross hatching. So it's a different way of thinking, but once you start thinking that way, it's incredibly useful. So that's another one of the uses of cross hatching. Um, now with depth, yes, how we cross hatch is important to create a sense of depth, because when things get, oh, I shouldn't do that. When things get further away, I'm getting a bit tired now. When things get further away in life, in reality, we don't see them as clearly because we look through a lot of atmosphere the further away something is, and that affects how we see things. So colors become less bright as things go further away. If they're really far away, the yellow spectrum disappears first, and so distance greens start to look blue because we don't see the yellow spectrum, and that just leaves the blue spectrum out of green. So there's those sort of things happening. But also dark areas aren't as dark. And so again, and it may be a shadow that's being cast exactly the same way closer, but the closer one will be darker. And so by manipulating the values, the darkness I create with my hatching, I can start to simulate in my drawing the effect of distance. I have quite a few videos on capturing the effect of detail of distance, and it's a very regular. There are very few drawings I do where I'm not trying to do that in some way. So you look at this, and I want this like to feel closer than that, than this, and closer than that, and then closer than the trees that you can see through here. There are some marks on this actually that are in the distance that, yeah. So you see how I've created a sense of closer and further, not just by the value, also by the heaviness of the marks, and also by the amount of detail that the marks are creating, and also by the way the edges, the sharpness of the edges. By manipulating all these things, I create a sense of further away. So that, yeah. Love that. Thank you. Fair enough. I can imagine being flooded would be. Yeah. As I said, look, I don't. I mean, I hate the fact that I don't reply to every comment. I hate the fact that I don't reply to every email. I hate the fact that I don't reply to every DM I get now, because I simply can't. Yeah, it just feels rude. But yeah, I guess I don't know. But yeah. Love you. Thank you, Amethyst. That's kind of you. I assume they do have for your one-on-one. Um, uh, no, it's not. If you want the details, send me a DM on Instagram, because I have a cut and paste that I can easily. Yeah. So if you do that, I'll send you the details, and you can take it from there. Yes, the insecurities are familiar. Hi, Shrimpy. Always draw trees in pencils and ink because it's so soothing. And look, yeah. What's not to love about trees? Have I ever been involved in any animation projects? No, look, I haven't been drawing that long, and animation hasn't been a part of it. Oh, when I was a little kid, I did. When I was about 8 or 9, you flick through things. You draw the little stick figures that when you flick through all the pages, they seem to move. I did a bit of that. Um, this is about no, no. Look, I'm shrimp. I'm happy shrimpy. I don't know how you use tags. I'm happy to answer any question. Definitely given me the courage to sketch. Oh, that's great, Jaden. Also started posting reels on Instagram to document my progress, which is terrifying. Well, that's great. Yeah, it's good to get over ourselves. It's really good to get over ourselves. Um, the negative hatching is very helpful. Ah, wonderful. That's great. How did you see all this negative space, small details that shaping tree shape silhouette? Well, I saw it first in my reference photo. Let me just see if it's the photo may be just here. But it will be just here, but just here is really messy because I pulled everything out to make that video and to find everything. And yeah, but it was in the video. Not the video, the photo. And so yeah. Look, it's always a case of I look at my reference and I think, how can I create that effect? What are the tools? What are the drawing techniques? What are the approaches? The way of capturing effect, the marks I can make with the tool I've got in my hand, which is probably most often a 0.3 or a 0.2 millimeter fine liner. What's the best option to create that effect? And you see, if I tried to draw those fine details as positive space, as drawing the outline, then the line would actually be the width of what I wanted. But the line's black and the background had to be black or very dark. And so you wouldn't see it. And you wouldn't get that real, like that jagged, upright new growth that was characteristic of the wattle in the reference. So it's always like there's no right way to do anything. It's what will, not with drawing anyway, it's what will create the effect that I'm after. And of course, you may be after a different vibe, a different feel in your drawing. So the way I do it may not be the ideal way for you, but I hope it illustrates the principle that this is what we're doing. We're trying to find marks that will create the effect that we want to create, which is why and the more we draw and the better we get at drawing, I find the easier it is for me now to visualize how I want my drawing to look at the end, because I'm more aware of the building blocks I've got to create it. And therefore I can start to anticipate how the techniques I have, how the marks I have at my disposal, and the control I have over my pen to create whatever. I can start to visualize now how I might combine them and work out how my drawing might look. That now then goes back and it helps me now to put those marks on the paper to create the finished thing that I want. So if you haven't hit like, please hit like. That's very helpful. And if you haven't watched the whole video, please, sometime when you're gardening or washing up, put the whole thing on and hear it from the start. That helps me out too with these longer videos. Okay, answer your question. Great. We'll do sliding. Okay, I'll look out for that, Jaden. What's the time? 9:30. Hour and a half I've been talking nonstop. Gosh. I'll go to bed and I'll lie there. Well, it's like tick, 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 tick. Yeah. Okay. What else is there to say? If I stop talking, my brain might just go to sleep. Only 4:30 a.m. Yeah, it is for you. For me, it's 9:30 p.m. here, which for most people probably isn't that that late. But I was up early this morning. Yeah. My pleasure. Uh, been working nights. That's all right. I'm glad people do. There's a lot of 24-hour things. I did have a job for 20 years where I was up at just after 5 every morning. So yeah, I'm probably more really by nature an early riser than I am a night owl. Um, yeah, but it's certainly been a great journey, but it is interesting that when I focused on cross hatching as a particular technique that I had to learn to master, it it always felt so difficult. And once I stopped worrying about cross hatching and the right way to do it, and I simply began to be thinking, how can I capture this effect in my drawing? I found I was using cross hatching in all these really quite complex ways that I'd never seen a video where anyone else talked about them. I mean, it was always just shade and shadow and the correct pattern to use. Um, and suddenly this whole world was opened up. I mean, the other really big thing for me that transformed my drawing, and I've said this on lots of things, is when I stopped thinking about drawings as being created by lines and began to think of drawings as being created by marks. And lines became one of the marks I could use. But to focus on marks rather than lines, it just opened me up to kind of like, yeah, no, don't rush to draw outlines. I mean, I don't know whether um, you might have missed it. It was quite early, but if you look at this path, what this it's a road actually, a dirt road. Look at the edges where the road meets the grass, encroaching on it. It would have been really easy to think, oh well, there's an edge there, and to draw straight lines, and that wouldn't have created the effect that we have in life. But by hatching all the detail and by changing the directions of the lines, so I've got vertical lines for the grass, I've got horizontal lines to hatch the shadows on the roadway to reflect the underlying form, and where I've had the meet and how much overlap and extra value I've created that way, I create the effect of the edge without actually drawing a line for the edge. So it's it's thinking marks has been tremendously helpful for me. It's 10:30. Where are you, Anne? Are you in Sweden or the UK? I think you might be the UK. Anyway, you're somewhere not here because it's certainly not windy and cool. Good day for drawing. Good day for an open fire then. It's going to be 40 degrees here tomorrow, so but it's very humid, which is good. We've had lots of rain too, so the humidity is terrible, but it does mean no bushfires, or nothing to worry about. It's not so much the temperature as the humidity, lack of humidity in the wind, which is the problem. When it happens, we have had a bushfire in our backyard once. We hadn't been here that long. That was exciting, I tell you. It was Christmas Day, in fact, which made it even more exciting because we planned to be on the other side of Sydney, and we had no Christmas food. Um, yeah. Yes, that was fun. Um, yeah, fire's not an easy subject to draw with a pen. No, that was the oh gosh, 2000 fires. The 2019, 2020 ones, they did come pretty close to us. I remember standing in the street watching the smoke down, yeah, well, it was sort of to the south of us. Um, but yes, no, it was the 2000 fires. That weren't nearly as bad as those ones, or other ones, fortunately. But it was exciting enough for me at the time. I tell you, who are some of my favorite artists? Um, Look, I must admit, I don't know many drawing artists. I've just been so busy drawing myself since I started drawing. So, um, but I'm pretty kind of obvious with art. In terms of drawing, there's an Australian artist called Lloyd Rees, REES, and I had a book on him, and he had some line drawings of a trip to Paris in the 50s, and just pencil drawings, very simplified, and I just love them. I actually took photos of them with me, and to hopefully inspire me. I didn't actually do any drawing that trip. I just carried about 5 kilos of drawing materials around for 2 months, 2.5 months, and didn't draw anything. But they're just, they so capture the feel of. They're both in Paris and in Italy, mostly Siena, I think, the ones that were in this book, and they really inspired me. And I've got a couple of artists whose drawings I took photos of when I came across them in different museums, and I couldn't tell you. I think one of them, the guy was named Israel someone, and I think he might have been Dutch. Oh, maybe it was in the Kunsthistorisches in Vienna. I really can't remember now. But I loved, he had street scenes, but some of them were night scenes, but drawn with pen, and yeah, they really inspired me too. I've got his drawings. I look at them sometimes, just the photos I took of the originals, but I'm afraid I don't know his name. Travel sketch with an A5 book and 2 pen types. Look, I mean, I've overcome a lot of hang-ups with my drawing, but I still struggle with a sketchbook that's bound, because I think, oh, it just puts that much pressure. I feel more free. I feel more free drawing in this than this. This has almost nothing in it. That's one of the first. I did that like about 20 minutes before Sydney was locked down for COVID, and then that kind of put that on the head. But I find this much more liberating. This is actually the paper I draw with all the time anyway. But you can just, oops. Oh, sorry, I just pulled a face because I thought it might knock the glass of water on the floor. So, but these are actually pencil drawings in there. And there's one more, they're trees. But I find these just really take the pressure off me from thinking, oh, every drawing has to be. I think there's just too many videos on YouTube of breathtakingly beautiful kind of illustrated sketchbooks, and I just think, yeah, I'm just going to make myself feel hopeless if I try and do that. So I find just taking each drawing one at a time far more liberating within myself to do. So am I going to try out other art forms in the future? I have got so much really high quality watercolor stuff that I bought from an art shop that had closed down a few years before, and the lady who'd run it was and who had all the stuff was moving interstate, and she was selling it like almost was giving it away, and yep, what paper, brushes, brushes that were hundreds of dollars that I bought for $5, like crazy stuff. So I keep really wanting to do it, meaning to do it, and I've played around a little bit, but what I've done is because I've done the oil painting for so long. Not that I've done that for 6 years, but I was doing that intensely. When I've used the watercolor, I haven't exploited the watercolor potential. I've really used it more like acrylic paint, really, over prints of some of the drawings I've done. So they weren't even drawings that I did expecting to use color on, which I think does impact things. But yeah, I really want to. And I guess when I eventually do, I guess I'll make some YouTube videos about the journey. So if that interests you, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, okay. MR understands what what I'm saying. Sketchy day in a sketchbook when they suck it. Yeah, because you have to look through those sucky ones to get to the good ones, don't you? That resonates with you, Anne? Yeah. Look, in the end, do what works. do what works for you in helping you to get to where you want to be. I mean, it's always going to be nerve-wracking for most people. Certainly, if you care about how it's going to look at the end, it's going to be nerve-wracking, the drawing process. But we do build confidence, and yeah, I certainly have over the last few years. Don't let it hurt you. You'll be able to look back on the drawings that hurt now, and you can see, yeah. And what's actually, I think, even more encouraging is when I look back at my early YouTube video drawings, and I have done some video. I'm sort of just out of camera trying to find them. Here's one. I look up the first ones that I was really happy with at the time. They're all larger too, but so this is a relatively early drawing that was part of a video. For a video. It's got far more of a drafting feel than how I would do this now. And I do have a video where I got a different drawing that looked like this, had this sort of feel, and I redrew it about 6 months ago to compare the difference. It was actually the first one of these that I did for a video, and I redrew it just to see how much my style had changed. And I mean, I don't have any problem with this, but I don't think it works as well as how I draw those things now, even if I were to draw them at that size. So that's encouraging to see, because not so much that I'm thinking there was a problem with the drawings, but from drawings that I thought were quite reasonable and still do, I feel like, well, I have improved. I have gone more in the direction that I know I was trying to get to when I did that. I was wanting to capture a sense of realism. And yeah, so that's encouraging. And it is good to encourage ourselves, particularly if, like me, you've done your drawing in isolation from people, because I haven't had a class around me. I haven't had people drawing with me that we could laugh and talk and cry and tear up with each other. It can be hard if you don't have people around you like that. So yeah. Let's have a look. Yeah, well, that's great. Pleased that it does, Jaden, flicking back and seeing the progress. That's always good. Okay, well, any final questions? It's probably getting to wrap up time, for me anyway. Yeah. Well, I can still put two words together that are semi-grammatical. It's drafting feel much more realistic than if you yeah look, I mean, and I might be a bit unhappy with something that you'd be very happy if you did, and that's fine, because we're at different places. But I don't want to stay in the same place. I'm always trying to push forward, and so the things I do now, a lot of them are things that I wouldn't even have dreamt of trying to draw, let alone expect to make a video on, a couple of years ago. So yeah, and the good thing about switching to smaller scale drawings, particularly ones that aren't quite so intense with line work, as opposed to larger ones, or I mean, I was very happy with this drawing, and I still am, but it took me an hour and a half to draw, and so it had to be sped up so much, you could barely see any of it. But by drawing smaller scale now, I'm able to complete that learning, and this is where I began to think about the learning cycle. I began to see that my pace of improving picked up because my learning cycle was shorter. It was 20 to 40 minutes rather than 60 to 120 minutes. And so, yeah, the tempo improved. Yep. Gosh, there's a very cold mouthful at the bottom of this. Ugh. So yeah, look, if anyone hasn't hit the like button, please do it for me. And yeah, why not go back and hear the start of this And if you haven't watched that video, hang on, I'll tell you what it's called. I'll go on my phone, content. Honestly, I live on my phone. I had to go see a physio because I'm on my phone so much that one of my arms twisted out of shape. And the physio said to me, "Yeah, I see a lot of this, but normally it's with 15-year-olds." Okay, it's the video was only 2 days ago. Gosh, it feels like longer. It was 10 ways to use cross-hatching for drawing realism. And so I have a different photo to look at each of the 10 ways, and then there's a photo at the end that does everything. So yeah. Or the cross-hatching paradox, which is only 4 days ago, but feels like a lot longer. Yeah, that's I think another if you struggle at all with cross-hatching, I think it's a very helpful way of thinking. So yeah, well, maybe we'll call it quits here, shall we? Thank you for joining, everyone. Really appreciate that. Especially thank you to all the people who commented, even if you just said, "G'day, I'm in such and such." I find that really exciting. Um, and yeah, if don't hatch too hard. Maybe at some point I'll go in reaction and I'll try and adopt a minimalist approach to my mark making and try and put as absolute few marks on the paper as I can. That's part of the excitement of drawing. We can keep changing the way we do it and how we do it, or I may put that energy into splashing some color on it, and so forth. I mean, I talk about going deep, not going shallow. Um, so because I went deep with the oil paint, when I did start doing a little bit of dabbling with the watercolor, I understood all these things about the colors that I wouldn't have had if I was starting from scratch. And I understood which pigments mixed well together with others and which ones didn't. Cadmium red doesn't mix well with anything, not if you have the expensive pigment. Yeah, so okay, all right. Always find it hard to say goodbye, but I think we will. So thank you, everyone, and please hit the like button if you haven't. And happy drawing for all of you where it's like 11 o'clock in the morning. Why not go and do a drawing now after you've listened to one of those two recent cross-hatching videos? And yeah, go and find something to hatch. Anyway, whatever you're drawing, whether there's cross-hatching or not, make sure you have fun. Yeah. All right. Cheers, everyone. Thanks, Emma. Bye-bye.